All right. Well, I have with me, I want to thank you. I have Alex Pracher here, who I was lucky enough to meet a couple weeks ago. And fully transparent, I'm really looking forward to learning a lot about your story from the little bit that we spoke about. It sounds like you're at a cool point professionally where you've made some decisions and pivoted. So I'm excited to hear a ton about you and kind of where you started. So if you don't mind, Alex, just do me a favor and give me a little introduction on your background and where you're currently at now.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate you having me. Really glad that I'm getting to know you and looking forward to it. Yeah, my name is Alex Pracher. I am currently the president of Holy Cross Preparatory Academy in South Jersey. And recently I have announced that I will be stepping down from that position at the end of this school year. But my background that's led me here, I think, has been, pretty interesting and unique. Very grateful for the opportunities that I've had. So I'm really looking forward to sharing that. And yeah, so I'm actually a product of South Jersey. I was born in New York, but my family moved down to South Jersey, actually Marlton, where I live now with my
Okay.
family.
Yeah.
So I've been in Marlton now for over 30 years. Um, went through Cherokee High School. Went through the same school system that my kids are in right now. So pretty cool to be
Yeah.
coming full circle like that. Um, but yeah, going back as far as I can remember, baseball was an integral part of my childhood. I was, you know, raised a Yankee fan, continue to be a Yankee fan, even though I live in
Go
South
Yanks.
Jersey amongst all these Phillies fans. So yes, I know that's a great way that we connect,
Yeah.
especially now that they've gotten off to the hot start that they've gotten off to.
Five
I'm
and
really
oh.
really
Let's
excited
go.
about this season. Yeah.
Yeah.
um, so that was unique, and but I actually do think that's a little bit of a part of my story because I did have the fortune of growing up a Yankee fan during the heyday of being a Yankee fan, learning what it meant to be, um, a winner, learning what it meant to be a good role model through guys like Jeter and Rivera, and just kind of having that be part of my foundation. I think that was actually pretty
Yeah.
pretty important, especially being a baseball player myself. I think that kind of shaped the way I viewed sports, the way I viewed competition. So that was pretty formational for me. So yeah, I grew up not only a baseball fan, but was fortunate enough to start playing pretty competitively at a young age. And I started to really enjoy it. It became kind of a strong passion of mine. I was good at it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the friends that I was making. It was pretty um, pretty amazing experience. And I felt like I was fortunate enough that every step that I took, I won. I was on winning
Yeah.
teams. I think that was pretty foundational for me too. In some ways good, and other ways bad, actually. I'll get to that later. But being a part of that, and and eventually getting an opportunity to play college baseball, that was pretty amazing opportunity for me. And I was fortunate enough to have a few different Division I schools interested in me. I ended up going to Stanford, which was an incredible experience for me. Um, and got the opportunity to pitch there. By my junior year, I was the closer. That was a amazing experience to be
Yeah.
relied upon, to end games. I think it was pretty awesome. When I look back
Yeah.
on that, especially like I said, being a fan of guys like Mariano Rivera, my whole upbringing and getting the opportunity to do that out there was really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, by my junior year, I was definitely expecting to play professionally. Didn't have too many thoughts outside of that, and when that didn't pan out, it was definitely a crossroads for me, and probably one of my early crossroads. I got to, um, have the opportunity to really look within, and I was fortunate enough to be ahead of graduation rate. So I was going to graduate a little bit early. Decided to take a year off. Was kind of figuring out what I was going to do,
Yeah.
and then was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to pitch one more year at St. Joe's University in Philadelphia. Just really worked out. They had two pitchers that graduated. I'm sorry, two pitchers that were drafted the year previous. They weren't really expecting that. So they had
Right.
some scholarship money available. They had some vacancies in their pitching staff. And I was fortunate enough to join their program. I got to be a starting pitcher for the first time since high school, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And got the opportunity to really, I think, appreciate my career rather than look at it as a stepping stone. It really became like something that I really enjoyed. I loved competing. And whether or not I got drafted from there, that was going to be what it was, and I
Yeah.
didn't. Then I got the opportunity to coach there for a year. So really, my time at St. Joe's, I really look on very fondly, and that was really cool. But eventually, I needed to, I guess, get a real job, so to speak.
Yeah.
Baseball is fun, and college baseball is fun, but for me, it wasn't the right path. And so, I went into education not long after that, despite not having had any formal education background. I was kind of surrounded by it. My wife's a teacher. Her parents were teachers. Education was just a very important part, of my life, and I thought it was a good direction to go in. And
Right.
now, after a little over a decade in education, and now getting to this role as president of a school, I've really done just about every possible role in, whether it's in the classroom, in a school building. And so that's been a fun ride. You know, every part of my life from the time I was a child had some level of coaching or teaching, instruction
Yeah.
involved, and I don't see that going away anytime soon. But at this point, looking to pivot, maybe out of being in a school building, but not necessarily lose that core of what it means to teach and coach and lead others. I think that's somewhat at the core of who I am.
Yeah. Impressive journey. Yeah, I had no idea. So let's go back a little bit. You have to tell me what it was like. You're a Jersey kid. You grew up in New Jersey. It's time to pick a school. You had some options. Um, I'm sure Stanford University and the education was a huge factor in it, but how hard was that decision to go to the completely opposite side of the country and take on a challenge that you're unfamiliar with, right? Like we've never played college baseball before, and going to college is a challenge within itself. How did you settle on Stanford?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that question. It was tough, and it was probably a lot tougher than I realized back then.
Mm.
Um, you know, this is a tough part of having had the experiences that I had, because you don't ever want to convey anything but gratitude and appreciation for being able to accomplish what most people could only dream of accomplishing. When
Yeah,
when you're playing baseball as a young kid and you're thinking, what's the pinnacle of that? Well, the pinnacle is playing Major League Baseball. Not far below that is playing at Stanford, right?
absolutely.
And I'm very grateful for that experience. At the same time, part of what I became passionate about after leaving, college, was this idea that, student athletes don't necessarily make their decisions for where they want to go to college for any of the right reasons. And I feel like I was an example of that as well. Certainly grateful for my time out there, and made some good friends and had some great experiences. Like I said, became the closer. It's not like I didn't get any opportunities or I had to transfer. Like, I had a great experience out there. But at the
Mm,
end of the day, like you said, a lot of those realities of being a teenager and having to go across the country, and you know you don't really evaluate that in the decision making process. You just think, oh,
Yeah.
I got this, I can handle this, and then you realize that, hey, this is a lot more difficult, and maybe there were other factors that could have gone into the decision making process. So
Y-
that was a real eye opener for me. And again, I'm very grateful, and like I said, I had a great experience. But I do look back and say, well, had I made this decision, or would that have changed the trajectory of my career? It's possible. It could have been better or worse. And I think that that's
Yeah.
where just having students in general, but specifically student athletes, have a foundation for making better decisions about their future. I became pretty passionate about that from that experience.
Which is so needed. And I always say I'll never forget the feeling. And I went to St. John's, and I'm from New Jersey, so hour and a half away. And
Mm-hmm.
the minute I got dropped off and my parents left, I could have been 10 hours away. That first feeling of when you're on your own, it's hard. And I can't imagine what it's like when you're actually across the country. What would be some of the things that, if you had a chance to go through that again, that process again, because I do think that's really important for young student athletes to hear, especially now. When we were going through it, social media wasn't nearly as big as it is now. And I think now these kids are under a lot of pressure, and they see so much of the outside accolades and their peers. What would you personally prioritize in your decision making that maybe you didn't back then when you were younger?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, to oversimplify it, it's all about fit, right? And
Hmm.
I think that's the that's the X factor that kids don't really think about, right? If you have that sneaking suspicion when you're there on a visit, or things just don't feel right, or what are you thinking of in terms of how is my life going to be over this time period, right? You're thinking about, the name recognition of the school. You might
Yeah.
be thinking about how much scholarship money you got, which could or could not be a good factor. You're thinking about potentially, the teammates and stuff like that. But a lot of times you're thinking about these things that in reality, as adults, we know might not be as important. And here's the interesting part: parents don't necessarily look at this for the right reasons either, right? They're
Yeah.
looking at the same name recognition, or they're thinking about things that might not be relevant. At the end of the day, it really comes down to quality of life, and what does that look like when you're on your own for the first time, right? Because
Yeah.
you're already going through such instability at that time in your life. Everything's changing from everything that you want to create some consistency and some quality of life. So for me, I can tell you that the big comparison for me was between Stanford and Duke, right? And those were the
Hmm.
two schools that I was between. And I can tell you that there were a few factors that now looking back, I probably didn't put enough emphasis on. Um, as a Stanford recruit, I was fortunate enough to actually get financial aid to help me to be able to afford my education. My parents afford my education. But what that
Right.
also allowed Stanford to do was not necessarily commit a roster spot to me,
Right.
right? Because they didn't
Right.
have to worry about, well, we have to give this scholarship. That roster spot was not guaranteed. Here's a funny thing, that
Yeah.
I didn't know that until I was about halfway through my fall, right? So my
Right.
freshman fall, I'm halfway through, and all of a sudden these guys are talking, and it's like, whoa, wait a second, just because I don't have a scholarship means I don't have a spot on that 25 man.
Yeah.
That was tough, and part of me is glad that I didn't know that, because I think that I pitched differently once I found that out, and fortunately I earned that roster spot, right? And I'm very
Right.
grateful that I was able to do that. But the reality is, I uprooted my entire life, went out to California, and found out halfway through the fall that my spot here is not guaranteed. And in fact, the guy that I'm out pitching right now, who does
Yeah.
have a roster spot because he has a scholarship, it's going to be a lot tougher to cut him than it is to cut me, right? So I
Yeah.
had this uphill battle that I didn't even know about. My parents didn't know about, you know. And again, maybe that's ignorance on our part, but the reality is I see that more in these future college student athletes, that most of them are ignorant to these processes and these understandings. And sometimes I even think that the coaches maybe play that up in the process as well. They understand so much more than you do. And I think educating the student athletes and their families is an incredibly important part of this process.
Yeah.
You know, Duke was offering me a scholarship that was very similar to, you know, the amount of financial aid I was receiving from Stanford, but it would have made me one of their priority players, you know. And
Yeah.
at the time, the comparison was Duke and Stanford, both great schools. Stanford won 2 College World Series, competing for a College World Series each and every year. Duke, they're starting to do some things, but they're not really competing in the ACC at the time. They're not really that quality of program. But looking
Yeah.
back, you know, it's interesting because now, you know, as a Yankee fan, I'm looking at Marcus Stroman, and you know, he would have potentially been a teammate of mine at Duke, and you know, he did pretty well for himself, right? And Duke
Yeah.
really did do a lot of the things that they said they were going to do. They grew as a program. They got better over that time. You know, could
Yeah.
I have been a highlighted player there and use that to kind of, you know, launch myself into the next part of my career? It's quite possible. Maybe a million other things could have happened. And again, I can't regret any of that. But the reality
Yeah.
is the decisions that I made at that time were not being made with all of the information at hand. And had I had that information, I think it's quite possible I would have made that differently. And you know, it's tough to say that because you don't want to appear ungrateful. But the reality
Yeah.
is, you know, student athletes, I would say the majority of them are making decisions for the wrong reasons. And so that's just become a passion of mine to make sure that, you know, that students are looking at every factor and really looking at the factors that matter, which is fit, quality of life, the value that you provide, right? Mutual
Yeah.
value where they're providing you something, but you're also providing them something in return. And I don't see that as very different than like the employer employee relationship as well,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
It's a mutual relationship. And I've always seen it that way. And I'm not saying that Stanford wasn't like that because it was mutual. And, you know, considering I didn't have a roster spot, they gave me that roster spot. And then I
Yeah.
earned that closer role my junior year. I'm extremely, you know, both proud and also appreciative of the coaching staff for giving me those opportunities. But at the same time, looking back, none of that was guaranteed. And I think a lot more of that would have been guaranteed had I made different decisions.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the transparency on that because for one, and anyone who's listening, I don't want you to mistake this as a lack of gratitude. It's a real clear look into what a 17 or an 18-year-old kid is feeling in that moment. You know, it's funny to hear your story. Mine was totally opposite. When I was coming out of high school, I had a couple full rides. I ended up going to St. John's on a full ride. I didn't even take an official visit there. I signed on the second day possible. You know, everything that I was told checked off. I had no idea. The first day on campus, I walked in there, and that was the first time that is, and it sounds so naive to say, but that was the first time I knew like how good that pitching staff was. I was a freshman coming in, and the then sophomores, there was 8 of them, and it ended up that all 8 of them ended up being drafted. And the pressure that comes with being a full ride student athlete was hard. And it was really cool to say to my friends, my peers, you know, I'm a full ride and I'm going. But the minute you get there and you have that pressure on you, it becomes real and you have to produce. And there's really no not producing because of what you mean to that coach. And also you coached a little bit, as you mentioned, at St. Joe's, and so did I, because I think that's kind of the natural progression of a lot of us baseball
Mm-hmm.
guys. As we try to
For
figure it
sure.
out, but uh, I don't belittle what the coaches are doing. They have a job to do, and they have a job to get players there, and they have a budget to work with, and that's the reality of it. But what you nailed on is we try to tell our student athletes it's an interview both ways. You will go through a recruiting process and it's intimidating. You'll have to match, you'll have to answer the coach's questions, you have to fit. But also, we really advocate for you interviewing those coaches in those universities as well, because you have to fit there and you have to see yourself producing and going in there and being able to, you know, benefit for yourself. And that's the hard part. And a lot of our parents, I know mine, uh, they didn't go through the recruiting process. I mean, their first time going through it was with me. So
Mm-hmm.
we didn't know the right questions to ask, or you know, who to ask. And so I really appreciate you, um, you know, kind of being transparent on that and showing the other side of that. And then what was your freshman year like? I know you mentioned by your junior year you were the closer, but what was the mentally and on the field, what was freshman year like for you?
Yeah. Well, like I said, it was kind of the tale of two falls a little bit because I remember distinctly finding out that, my roster spot was in jeopardy and really narrowing it down to like three or four guys. Probably one of the four of us was going to not make it. And we were all pretty talented. And I remember that being about halfway through the fall. So when I first got there, it was tough. I will, again, just in the spirit of transparency and vulnerability, you talk about what that experience is like. I mean, I remember having, what can only now in hindsight be described as a panic attack pretty much the
Mm-hmm.
day that my parents dropped me off.
Yeah.
Never had that experience before. And, didn't necessarily realize that I was as anxious as I was about that experience. So I can tell you that when I first got there, the allure of what it was going to be like wore off very quickly. And it
Yeah.
very soon after became, okay, this is work. I'm further away than most of my teammates from what I know. Time zones are real. It's the
Yeah.
reality is when your time zone doesn't line up with your family and the people that and you're maybe playing some phone tag, that can be real too. Like that, all these things factor in, and you can feel pretty isolated and alone, whether you're 50 miles away or 3,000 miles away. It
Yeah.
can still happen no matter what. That's something that's really difficult. But I remember just kind of saying like, look, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna compete. I can tell you that as somebody who was the probably one of the tallest guys on my team, threw the hardest when I was in high school. And then I go out there and I'm the shortest guy on the pitching staff. I, probably had
Yeah.
the lowest velo of anybody on the pitching staff. It's a rude awakening. You get out there
Yeah.
and you're like, these are, specimens. And
Yeah.
I'm, coming from this, small town in South Jersey. And it's like, okay, what did I get myself into? And, but I learned pretty quickly that a lot of that can be eyewash as well. A lot of that, one of the things I remember, somebody said to me very early on, I think we were doing some running workout and I was like dead last. Right.
Yeah.
And I remember somebody say to me, like kind of put their arm on my shoulder and say like, you don't run the ball from the pitcher's mound to home plate, kind of saying like, you might not be competing right now in these runs that we're doing, but that doesn't mean that you still can't pitch, right? And so,
Yeah.
the reality is I outpitched a lot of guys that fall. I was, able to locate, really figured out quickly, fortunately for me, that I can't blow the ball by guys like I could in high school, that I needed
Mm-hmm.
more than just, at the time I was very fastball change out of
Yeah.
high school. And I needed to develop a breaking ball quickly. Um, so I was able to, like I said, make a roster spot. I actually pitched through most of that spring. I logged quite a few innings. I was kind of an innings eater. I didn't have a great ERA, but I pitched a lot of innings. And that
Yeah.
was the year that, Stanford went to the College World Series that year in 2008. Unfortunately for me, I was left off of that roster. I actually pitched in the regional and was left off the roster
Awesome.
for the College World Series. I was basically the 26th man, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. But that was
Yeah.
actually a good experience for me too. Not getting to pitch in the World Series, not getting to go out to Omaha. I think it left a little bit of a bitter taste in my mouth. But I also
Yeah.
recognized that what it showed me is you can start the season strong, but that doesn't mean you're going to finish it strong. I think that's a good life
Yeah.
lesson, and I think it helped me build my stamina and my conditioning for the future. And it might have been what led me to become the closer 2 years later as a junior. Just really showing me that nothing's guaranteed. I think that was
Yeah.
pretty important.
Yeah. You man, it brings back such memories just talking to you. I mean, those are one of the things I think that surprised me most when I got to college and started playing was looking for that travel roster and seeing if you made that
Mm-hmm.
travel roster. I mean, freshman year, that was my most nervous every Thursday before we left. Like, am I on the travel roster? Am I going on this weekend's trip? And those little things I wasn't aware of. And it's just again, it's just to reaffirm how much you have to mature right away once you're there because you're on your own, right? And I mean, you have your family and you can call them, but those moments, whether you make a trial roster or don't, those are hard to deal with. And those can, I mean, some guys they don't bounce back from it. Some guys don't take it the right way or don't use the message to work harder. And it's it's a woe is me thing. And you see that. And it's not rare to see that. And that happens a lot. But I don't want to go over anyone's head, your story and how hard it is. I mean, I guess I can really relate to it because I've been through it to not have a roster spot guaranteed to then even being in the innings either your freshman year. That journey, I can imagine being in your spot and how hard in the moment it probably felt like a lifetime's worth of work just to get to that spot. So now where we talk about it, it doesn't seem that much, but I don't want it to go over anyone's head that how hard and how much discipline you have to go, into that. But your team went to a College World Series. I mean, for me, the furthest we made it was a super regional, and we weren't there long. Clemson,
Mm.
Clemson took care of us pretty quick. And I was actually left off of that travel roster. So similar to you, but you got some regional experience, which is really cool. But tell me the other side of it. I mean, you're a Division I college baseball player. Your team's College World Series bound. How cool is that in the moment?
Yeah, I mean that was pretty cool. That was a special year. Um, we had some pretty incredible players, and it's funny because that was the old bats. Like we were still like guys were really hitting bombs like crazy, and
Yeah.
it was a pretty impressive roster though. A lot of guys that ended up playing. We ended up having a couple future major leaguers. Specifically the ones that jump out are Jason Castro, who has
Yeah.
made a great career for himself as a catcher in the big leagues. Also part of the MLB Players Association, which is pretty cool as well.
Yeah.
Drew Storen, who was our closer at the time, who came in, he was our year, who ended up having a ton of saves in the big leagues, but also a lot of future minor leaguers as well, guys that really,
Yeah.
were very impactful players. Um, so you could tell kind of right away that that team was special. I think part of that also being that Jason Castro was our catcher and kind of was the
Yeah.
field general, and you could just feel that that year was going to be the year for him. As a
Yeah.
junior being his last year there, you knew he was going to get drafted pretty early. Um, so there was definitely a buzz around that team, and I think that thinking back on it, as much as it's a very strange feeling because you're used to competing at a high level. I do feel like maybe part of me took that for granted as well because I
Mm,
did feel like I could fit in, and like I said, I did get to pitch that year. But then to also feel that intimidation of all these guys, especially the fact that a lot of our most talented players were juniors that year.
yeah.
Really good, talented ball players that, definitely creates that intimidation factor of, do I belong? Um, like I said, fortunately, I did. I did
Yeah.
get the opportunity to play and participate. Going into the end of that season, knowing that we were definitely going to make a regional, we knew that pretty early. But we kind of felt like that was going to be a College World Series or bust type of year. Um, in the regional, one of our relief pitchers was hurt. So like I said, I was like that 26 guy. I was teetering at that time. So I did get that roster spot. I think I ended up throwing a third of an inning, got an out. It was pretty
Yeah.
cool to just get my feet wet. But he was an older guy, and there was no way he was going to continue to be hurt beyond
Yeah.
that. So I think he was back for Super Regional, and I lost that spot. Got to watch
Oh,
on TV my team go and win a Super Regional, and then watched. Actually, I was already playing summer ball. I remember watching from the games in summer ball. They had a little TV in the concession stand and watching my team out there
yeah.
competing in the College World Series. It was cool. It was a great experience. I was fortunate enough when I got back in the fall of 2008. Um, Coach Marquis nine, he gave me a trophy actually as a
That's
participant,
awesome.
which was a pretty cool gesture. Recognizing that I did help us to get there,
Yeah.
but I think that was, like I said, I think it was foundational for me to both get the opportunity to compete and show what I could do that year, but also kind of have that bittersweet ending. I do think that that really did propel me to some of my success later on.
Yeah, yeah, and not to mention, on top of all of this, you're at Stanford University. So, at what point did you go into it with a backup plan if baseball wasn't going to work? Did you know what you wanted to do major wise
No.
going into it? So how did that take care of itself? When did that start to really kind of, click and turn for you?
Um, Full disclosure,
Yeah,
when the third day of the draft in 2010 came and went
for
and my
sure.
name hadn't been called,
Yeah,
okay, what's next? And I think that going back to the conversation that we were having at the beginning, which is you don't make your decisions when you're, a teenager. You don't necessarily make your decisions for the right reasons. I also think that goes hand in hand with the lack of foresight beyond sports for
yeah,
student athletes. And don't get me wrong, part of my insurance policy, so to speak, was going to Stanford, right? I was
yeah,
fortunate enough to go there. So I did feel that I put myself in a position that if I don't get to play professionally, I have other options, right? But at the same time, there was never really a thought, and maybe that's somewhat of a protecting mechanism for athletes is if I think that I might not make it, I'm not going to make it because I don't have enough confidence to make it, right?
yeah,
So I do think there's a level of that is a defense mechanism. Really, is I have
yeah,
to think I'm the best, otherwise I can't compete at that level. But at the same time, the reality, the vulnerability of maybe this isn't going to work out. What are my other options? I do think that we have an obligation as the adults in the room to kind of really instill that upon young student athletes because like I said, we're talking literally day three of the draft. That's
yeah,
when I started to think about what's next, and you got to start thinking about that earlier. I was a political science major. Looking back, would I have been a political science major if I thought baseball's not going to work out? Probably not. I might have,
yeah,
gone in a different direction. Not to say that political science wasn't something I was interested in or not, good for, future jobs, but a lot of political science majors become, JD candidates and become attorneys.
yeah,
And that wasn't a path that I was going to be going down. So, making those decisions for the right reasons, I really think is key, and setting yourself up so that you can just free up and play baseball or whatever sport that it is. I
yeah,
think that you don't have to you don't have to stop focusing on your sport, but you have to give that possibility that it's not going to be your future. You have to
yeah,
really give that some thought. And I think having those things happen in parallel are really key for any student athlete. And same goes for high school. I mean, I had this going from college to the potential of professional baseball,
yeah,
but there's a lot of high school students out there who they have that same thought process going to play college sports, right? But there's a
yeah,
reality that you might not play in college, or might not play Division 1, or you might only play for a fall or one season, right?
right,
What does that after look like? And I think
yeah,
that that's something that is very undervalued and is not something that we think about very often. As student athletes, as parents of student athletes, we have to give that reality a real thought because
yeah.
it's most of the rest of our lives.
Absolutely. And it's not to say that, I mean, being a student athlete, and I think from the outside looking in, it's a glorious life. It's fun. You know, it's something that I think general students look at and think maybe we have it easier. And it's not to compare that, but so much time in college specifically is allocated to the game, especially at the Division 1 level. You have a huge responsibility to be present, to be getting better, to be plugged into the team. It's a huge time commitment. But like I think what you're saying, and I know for certain for myself, we have to find time to at least carve out the what if side. just to have that backup plan. And that doesn't mean that you sacrifice your athletic side of it. It's sometimes it's not going to be easy, but it does mean to realistically we encourage athletes at least once a month to write down their goals outside of the sports world and to make sure every month or so you're checking in yourself and holding yourself accountable outside of the sports. Um, do you feel that you when you went to Stanford and then going through Stanford, do you feel like there was a support system for you as an athlete, bringing the awareness to that side of it, the outside once sports are over, or was it just kind of go go go? I'm an athlete. We got to get our job done.
Yeah, I think there definitely was a support system. And, I'll go back to Coach Marquis, who, was adamant that we didn't even take um, the basic amount of credits, right? There are some coaches out
Yeah.
there who are like, just do the bare minimum, maybe
Yeah.
even, take this over 5 years. We'll redshirt you. We'll give you all this runway so that you don't necessarily have to, overload your schedule, right? Coach Marquis was the opposite. He was take more credits each and every quarter than the typical student.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
that actually gave me the opportunity to graduate in less than 4 years. And he did that for many reasons. He knew that over his long career that many students after their junior year were drafted and therefore couldn't finish their degree. But if you're 1 quarter or 2 quarters away from
Yeah,
graduating instead of three, you're much more likely to eventually get your degree, right?
for
And
sure.
that's a huge, that was a huge thing that he did. But also he advocated for what we were doing in the classroom, and really the entire coaching staff was very focused on making sure that we were representing ourselves well in the classroom. And then what also ended up happening was the peer support for doing well in school. I
Yeah.
remember this was not a pro baseball player, but you might remember the name from the NFL, Toby Gerhart, who was one of my
Oh yeah.
teammates when I was at Stanford, right? Great baseball player, but even better football player. And he
Yeah.
ended up showing that. But I remember distinctly, a couple of us were having a conversation about like not going to class. We were on the bus and we were talking about like, oh, we're not going to class the next day. And I remember distinctly Toby, kind of getting on our cases about like, well, what are you here for? You know, and
Wow.
this is a guy who we knew was going to be a multimillionaire in a few years, and he was going to do great
Yeah.
things. And all he was thinking about is, hey, we're getting in late on a Sunday night, but I'm going to my 8 a.m. class the next day. And so
Yeah.
the peer support for that, it's typical that especially as a student athlete, you're being discouraged from being good in school, right?
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
when I was at Stanford, it was a very different approach. It was how do we get better as people, as human beings, and learning is part of that process. So I think that was a really, again, that was really key is having that support system, but not necessarily because they were telling you what to do, but they were setting the right example for what a student athlete at Stanford looked like.
That's powerful. Yeah, that's powerful. That's really cool to hear, actually. And that's honestly all you could hope for. And that's probably a big reason why you guys are so good. You have to have a few of those guys who are just built differently. Keep the mission going. Talk to me about St. Joe's. How did that happen? How did you go from Stanford to getting that last year at St. Joe's? What was that process, and how were you able to get a year of eligibility to play there?
Yeah, so I'll go back to day three of the draft. Like I said, my name's not called.
Hmm.
Um, my now wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, we had been together actually since high school and all through college. And she was, had her plans set in South Jersey, and realistically, I was thinking about what my future was going to look like playing in Arizona or wherever that next step
Yeah.
was, playing rookie ball, A ball, whatever. Um, and it hit me hard, and I really started to think about, okay, what's next. And I decided that because I was going to graduate early, I didn't have to put in a full year. I was going to take some time off, and that was not an easy decision. But you know I definitely don't regret it because it did allow me that opportunity to play at St. Joe's, which was not a thought at the time. But I
Yeah.
took that year off, maybe at times thought I was never going to play again. Maybe at times really got excited about the opportunity, but realizing that I had a year of eligibility, I said, let me try to get my master's degree. And let me try to get at least some of it or most of it paid for by using the talent that I have. Some of it did go away by taking a year
Yeah.
off. I wasn't as sharp as maybe I was, but I figured, let me try this. So, like I said, St. Joe's, it was really pretty serendipitous the way it all worked out because, like I said, they had just gotten two pitchers drafted. They really weren't expecting to have two guys drafted. They were banking on one, but when two guys got drafted, both of them pitchers, they had some money left over. A master's degree doesn't cost the same as a year of a bachelor's degree. So now,
Yeah.
they have this amount of money that perfectly suits what I need. They have a roster spot and a vacancy available. They probably, in order to really start competing, needed a frontline pitcher, not, somebody who's just going to be a mid-inning reliever.
Yeah.
So it really worked out great. One of the coaches at the time actually knew me from my Cherokee days because he lives literally across the street from Cherokee High School, and so it just all worked out. And having that opportunity, it did feel like a second chance, a little bit of a fresh start to really appreciate the game, right?
Yeah.
And maybe one last time appreciate the game, knowing that now I know nothing's guaranteed. Now I know I'm just 2 years older going into the draft. It's even less likely I'm in this, mid
Yeah.
D1 school in Philadelphia. I'm a lot less likely to get drafted. So I really enjoyed it for what it was. Got the opportunity to play with some great guys. Got the opportunity to pitch behind somebody. Now I was the Saturday guy. I was the starting pitcher, and it was awesome. Um,
Yeah.
but Kyle Mullen, our Friday guy, who is the best pitcher in St. Joe's University history. That includes Jamie Moyer, who ended up being a big
Yeah.
leaguer. Look up Kyle Mullen's career. It was pretty incredible. And he was our Friday guy, and I learned a lot from him, and we got to compete. We made the A10 tournament. We made a run in the A10 tournament. I got to finish my career with a complete game shutout. And I
Awesome.
think I threw like something like 130 something pitches. And I actually remember, Skip, Coach Hamburg, was trying to pull me after the eighth inning. And, I just shot him a look like,
Leave it.
you're going to have to literally carry me off of the mound. It's
Yeah.
not
At
going
this
to
point,
happen.
yeah.
This is
Yeah.
it. What am I out there for? Maybe I get drafted. I'm
Exactly.
probably not. This is it for me, and this is the way it's going to go.
Hell yeah.
And we made a nice run in that. And St. Joe's has really had an upward trajectory since then. And I'm really proud of my time there, not only for what it was able to accomplish for me as an individual and really appreciating that time and the people that I got to meet, but also the fact that we were kind of that inflection point in St. Joe's baseball, where they've now continued to grow since that time. And I'm
Yeah.
really, really proud of my time there. And, that's why going back full circle, this idea that I might regret decisions that I made. I don't regret any decisions that I made. It's brought me to this point. It's allowed me to have all of these experiences.
Yeah.
And, maybe had I not gone to Stanford, maybe I wouldn't have ended up at St. Joe's and having some of these, what I hope are lifelong relationships that I've developed in that time. So,
Yeah.
really, it was a great experience, and I'm really grateful for having had the perspective of both, being on the Stanford roster and being a Hawk as well.
Yeah. I want to touch on that a little bit. It's similar to with me, you know, I want to hear kind of from your point what the St. Joe's program is like, from coaching to, support compared to Stanford. And I asked that because, as I mentioned, I started at St. John's, and it was a great experience. And the things I remember are it was the old Big East. I remember Louisville and Cincinnati, and like going to these places that the well-known brands, and you kind of like always dreamed of playing there. And then once I got injured, and again, when you're carrying a full scholarship, you got to make a decision. And I ended up going to Long Island University in Brooklyn. Totally different program, right? We didn't win
Mm-hmm.
that much, but I tell people, and I'm so happy that I did because that program at LIU with Coach Maines was ran the exact way that Coach Blankmeyer ran his program at St. John's. We were held to a high standard. He made sure, and he understood, Coach Maines at LIU, that we weren't going to play for a College World Series. So although we wanted to win and we worked as hard as anybody else, he also understood that he was raising, young men and teaching us how to become men, teaching us responsibility, discipline. And I can literally put those two programs besides the win numbers. I could put those next to each other, and I could tell like someone right now, just a high school athlete who's deciding, those two programs are ran similarly. And I had a great experience at Long Island University, and I almost credit a lot of who I am today because of Coach Maines and because of what LIU did for me after my transfer. What was St. Joe's, the program, like, comparable to what you left, which was the best of the best? What was that like?
Well, I think what it comes down to is, you know, the head coach really sets the tone. And I
Yeah.
think that, Coach Hamburg at St. Joe's, it didn't really matter what logo we had on our hat. He was going to run any program in this country the same exact way with
I love that.
expectations of greatness and excellence. Um, so I think that's really what set the tone. I think he did understand implicitly that there were differences in what he had, the resources he had to work with.
Yeah.
But in many ways, having limited resources, it's a testament to him for being able to put together the program that he did. And I think at the time, there were still some growing pains.
Hmm.
He was still pretty early in his tenure there. And I think, my time there was also very much, like I said, an inflection point in the trajectory of the program.
Yeah.
Were we just going to be kind of this mid-level program who lost 30 something games a year? Was it going to be a program that was starting to build? And I think he's shown since that point that the program has grown. Um, but I think having come from Stanford and going to St. Joe's, I wanted to make a point that I think when you get to that level, the margins are not very significant.
Yeah.
And that was more what I was looking at. Was we're still playing Division I college baseball. I make a mistake in
Yeah.
the middle of the zone, I'm gonna get hit, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I can make a few more mistakes than I could out there, but wasn't necessarily that much of a difference. And I remember distinctly going back to talking about Kyle Mullen earlier. I remember distinctly, like, at some point in the season, saying something to him along the lines of, like, you realize that you could pitch at Stanford, right? Like, do
Yeah.
you understand that? And, to him, it was like, no, how is that even possible? But, I'm looking at him and I'm like, I actually look at you and I think of a pitcher that I played with out at Stanford, and you guys have almost the same exact build, the same profile, the same pitch profile. Everything looks the same. And look at you, you're dominating in the Atlantic 10 for
Yeah.
multiple seasons. You end up being, the best pitcher in school history. But just, I think what that allowed us to do is really, and I think some of my teammates would say that my presence brought a next level of expectation,
Hmm.
that, like, hey, guys, we can do this, right? Look at this guy that was at Stanford, but now he's here, and
Yeah.
he's not always, performing perfectly, right? He's not out
Yeah.
there and dominating all the time. He got lit up at St. Bonaventure, right?
Hmm.
Like, these are things that, and I always wanted to make sure that my teammates recognize that, like, you guys are doing something special by playing Division I baseball, and also by being on this ground floor of this program and really setting the tone for what this program should be like. And
Yeah.
we had a lot of really good guys, good people, and I think that that was really a key to that experience, was being able to say, look, the margins between what I used to play and what I'm playing now, they're still very, very thin. And what maybe separates some guys, some of the stuff is not as necessary for baseball as you would think either. So, maybe, yeah, we don't have a ton of guys that are 6'8" on the St.
Yeah.
Joe's roster. Maybe we don't have a ton of guys that are throwing 98, 99 miles an hour, but that's not always what you need to succeed at that level anyway, right? So just
Yeah.
kind of showing them, like, we might not all be, at that level, but we're pretty close and we can still have fun playing this game. And I think that was really key for me.
Yeah.
And hopefully was help those guys with their experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't speak enough to the amount of talent that is across the country. I've gotten to play with some really legitimate baseball players, some pro players. From LIU, we have two guys that are teetering AAA and pro. And I think besides the fact that they're incredibly talented, but the biggest reason is because they were able to get on the field and they were able to play and get the reps and get the at bats. Could they have played anywhere, to your point? Yeah, probably. They could have probably played at a lot bigger name of a school. But I think they made the right decision. Well, obviously they did. They made the right decision for different reasons. One of my good friends, James Jones, he just didn't grow early enough. He grew in college. He got better, faster, stronger in college. He wasn't the same person coming out of high school that he was by his sophomore year of college. There's nothing that could have changed that. But he made the right decision. Instead of going to a school where he was projectable, he was 6'4", he could fly, he had a cannon for an arm, but he was extremely raw. And he had an opportunity to go to a bigger school. But I think choosing LIU really changed his trajectory because he got to play from his freshman year. I don't think that should be overlooked by anybody. And it's funny to think of St. Joe's as a mid-major and A10, but A10 baseball is really good baseball. I mean, every single
Hmm.
weekend, for the most part, you're playing really good baseball teams. And there's not a ton of change. And I think the biggest thing that I noticed in my change was the talent levels neck and neck. Maybe the depth, when we were at John's and you're playing, maybe 1 through 9 can hit when you're playing in Louisville or whatever it is. But the level is there. And I get my first start at LIU. I mean, I we played at Siena and it was probably one of my worst outings ever. And it was the most humbling thing I think I've had. And I still to this day don't know what the hell went wrong, but something did. And from that point on, I was like, you know what, this is Division I baseball. And I do believe that that's prevalent at every level. I was lucky enough to coach Division III right out of college when I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I could be honest, I've never seen a Division III baseball game until I coached my first Division III baseball game. And I walked into a staff which I had nothing to do with my first year, and we had some kids on there that were just flat out pitchers. I mean, good baseball players, and they were there for different reasons, whether it be financial, whether it be grades, whether it be where they were at the project, when they're getting recruited. But they could have played Division I baseball, and I remember telling some of
Hmm.
them that. So to anyone's listening, my point of that is just and I think with Alex, is just really fully evaluating yourself and being transparent and honest with yourself. With I think I could have done a better job of, and I know a lot of student athletes in high school, it's not easy to do, but I think you only owe it to yourself to really assess where you are and what you'll benefit most from. And most of the time, that's just opportunity to play. And you'll find that the talent is there. Um, so what are you doing? What are you doing now post playing career? I know you mentioned you're a president and you're looking to transition. What's on the horizon for you professionally moving forward?
Yeah. So, at this point, nothing is concrete, and I think that
Hmm.
that's a little bit difficult. Of course, you would want to know exactly what that next step looks like. What is
Hmm.
next on the horizon? And I think maybe kind of bringing this back to my time playing. Playing baseball, growing up, it gave me a confidence in myself, which obviously can teeter and, sometimes you're more confident than others, but, kind of just like that idea of like investing in myself right now and
Yeah.
believing in myself. I think that that's really, come from that foundation of, playing when I was younger and recognizing that you don't know if it's going to work out, but you're going to do your best, right? You're going to
Yeah.
push yourself and you're going to do your best. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And having that kind of self belief, I think, is propelling me forward now.
Yeah.
But like I said earlier, I don't know what that next step is, but I think what I'm learning, going all the way back to when I was a little kid, I had a younger brother that was a decent amount younger than me. And I always kind of served in more of a teacher coach role with him than maybe
Yeah.
a typical brother. And, some of that I regret. I wish that we could have had a little bit more of just a sibling relationship, but it ended up
Hmm.
being that from a young age, I was, his teacher, coach, especially when it came to sports.
Yeah.
And I feel like as I look back on that now, almost 30 years later, at every step along the way, I've done something involving coaching, teaching, advising others, right?
Yeah.
And that's, I think that that tendency to kind of look from a 10,000-foot view back down on the arc of your life is, when you see this same pattern coming up over and over again, you realize that that's probably partly what you should be doing. And so I
Right.
think that, no matter what I do, no matter what that next step looks like, I think teaching, coaching, advising others is really what I might be here for, what I might be made for. So that's kind of what I'm looking at as I move into these next steps. And, whatever that ends up looking like, I really don't know, but I know that in some way, shape, or form, it's going to involve, teaching and coaching in some way.
Yeah. Well, just for the short time that we've had together, I want to ask you this question, uh, based off of I think the valuable things you've been through, but also just your transparency. I can see the coaching and educating part for a high school student athlete who does have the opportunity to play, or at least is seeing the recruiting and talking to coaches. Um, you've given a lot of insightful advice already, but if you could sum it up and give it to one person on what you would recommend somebody who's going through the high school process, and let's say they have a few schools to choose from, um, what would be one of your major pieces of advice for someone in high school trying to make this big decision for themselves?
Get your ego out of the way.
Yeah.
That would be, if I could sum it up as briefly as possible, get your ego out of the way, make the decision for things that actually matter, right? Don't think that you're a D1 guy if you're not, and really
Yeah.
have that ability to look in the mirror and say, do I want to pretend I'm a D1 guy until halfway through the fall, and then I decide and I realize that I'm not, and I have to make
Yeah.
a change? Or do I really look in the mirror and say, this is the best approach for me? I'm going to go D2, D3, and I'm going to look at these schools because they're a better fit for me, right?
Yeah.
Do I need to play right away? Well, some guys, that is what's best, right? I do think I agree with you that playing time is key because it shows you that this is where you belong because it's at your
Hmm.
level, right? If you're not going to get any playing time, you probably overreached a little bit. If you're
Yeah.
dominating as a freshman, you might have also underreached, right? You
Yeah.
might not have actually gotten to the level that you could have gotten to. But at the end of the day, get your ego out of the way, right? And I think that's a good
Yeah.
life lesson in general. And I do think that that's something that's really tough for teenagers. I'm still learning that now.
Yeah.
In my mid 30s, I'm still learning that process. But I think that would be my key advice: is really look at yourself in the mirror, really look at your opportunities, and evaluate them without thinking about what does this say about me to the world, right?
Yeah.
What does this tell the world about me? If I pick this school, I'm going to get recognized by these people, right? That really doesn't matter at the end of the day. And the
Yeah.
quicker that you learn that, the better off you'll be in life.
Yeah. And I don't want to speak for you, but I know for me, some of my best memories come from the lesser school that I went to. And I think a lot of the things that I look back on now probably wouldn't be the things that I would have picked were important to me as a teenager. It's the relationships that I have with some of my teammates. It's the few experiences that we have, whether it be on the bus ride or, study hall, like little things that when you're in your mid 30s like us, our values change a little bit, and you appreciate certain parts of the game that uh you don't know you're going to go through until after. So I think if you can listen to two of us older guys talk about it, I would also just reiterate just really understanding the big picture of it. And I think the hardest thing to get through is wasting time because you don't get it back. And like you said, you don't want to be in the middle of the fall, are going home for winter break and already have an idea that you don't fit this program, or maybe you overreached a little bit, you're not getting that time back. It's not the end of the world, but you don't want to waste time if you have the opportunity. If you know deep down in your heart that you have the right decision there for you, I think just going with it and taking it is a big piece of it. So I appreciate that advice for sure, and your transparency on that is huge. Alex, where can anyone who's listening, or young student athletes, or parents who have kids going through it, where would be the best place to reach out to you and pick your brain a little bit more about your journey connected? Would that be LinkedIn? What would be the best place to connect with you?
Yeah, I've really tried to build my profile on LinkedIn lately. So that would be the best place to reach out to me.
Awesome.
And it also gives you an opportunity to see kind of my thoughts on the world as well, some of the content that I put out. Again, it goes back to that relationship of, mutual benefit, right? If you
Yeah.
might be interested in me, you want to get to know what I'm about. And so I'm trying to put myself out there a little bit more. So that would be the best place to reach out to me. Hopefully, we can connect. And like I said, it is important to me to try and provide some of those opportunities to young student athletes who, may just not have thought of things in a certain way. And if I can just get them to think of something a little bit differently, that helps change the direction of the rest of their lives. It's very valuable to me as well.
Yeah, well, I encourage anyone who's listening to do that. One, because I am connected with you on LinkedIn, and I do love just your outlook on certain things that you put out there. But two, I'm lucky enough, and I get to speak to a lot of people and former athletes, and I could tell you for sure, just speaking with you and hearing your journey, it's incredibly relatable. I think it's majority of us where we go through some of the challenges that you went through, and your journey really is incredible because of the path you took with Stanford and just how you had to battle every single year just to have that roster spot. I think a lot of us can learn from that and what that's about, and I think it's a story that the more people that hear it, the more benefit it's going to be. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate your transparency. I hope for sure this isn't the last time you're on, and we get to connect again and dive deeper into more and more. I could talk baseball with you all day. I feel like we're I feel like we're all teammates in that.
And we
But
should do this
Alex,
weekly.
yeah, right. Yeah, just bring the crowd in. But I thank you a ton, man. I mean, I can't tell you how valuable this information is, and having people like you spread the message out and helping high school student athletes, and then even college student athletes who are in the midst of the grind right now, to recognize that there is life after the game. And once that last pitch is thrown, or you're hanging the cleats up for the last time, it is a tough transition for some of us, but there's a lot of opportunities, and I think there's a lot of transferable skills from athletes that we can apply to the real world. And I really appreciate in watching you do it. And I'm thankful to be a part of your network, man. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt, and giving me a little bit of time to have a platform. I really appreciate it, and it's been great getting to know you.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot. Go follow, go connect with Alex on LinkedIn, and I appreciate everyone for listening in.